Before I turn to the audience, and I'm asking them to not be shy, I myself would like to just say how inspiring it was to hear you, to hear about the innovations you have made, are making, will continue to make.
It's really conversation between you two.
Absolutely. I so much enjoyed this. I just wanted to talk with her alone. And I want to blank all of you out. But seriously, please, colleagues, prepare your questions, comments, suggestions. But as we do that, I just wanted to also say I was so inspired by your remarks, by the innovations that you have championed, are championing, will be championing. But I was also very much struck by so many things, but particularly at the center of this, as you yourself have mentioned, is partnerships. Yes. And the evolution of partnerships, how partnerships evolve, how they change, the role they play. If I may ask you, before I come to the audience, you have yourself played a very critical role over the years with partnerships. And partnerships today in America, but partnerships in developing countries. So if I may ask you, with the emphasis you're putting on the private sector, the role of the private sector to shape the environment, the ecosystem in which we operate, could you comment also on how you see developing country, private sector, getting engaged earlier? How do we find a way to reach them and effectively integrate them, because this is no longer just a America problem, or no longer just a China or an India, it's a global. How do we find ways?
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, and there's so many things we can talk about, so let's dive in. Well, first, yes, partnership is the key. It's emerged as a theme throughout my entire career, and particularly partnership with corporate players at the Council on Foreign Relations, at the World Food Program. We built some of the most effective partnerships. DSM helped us to fortify all the food that we distributed globally. And at the food bank, the work we did improving our retail inventory was really done with Giant Foods and Shoppers Food Warehouse. And so partnerships are important, and I agree that in the developing world, you know, for one thing, companies are global, right? So there's opportunity there. But two, in urban areas, the very dynamics that I discussed throughout this speech are in play in cities. And I know the World Food Program, we really struggled and to find an effective way to reach people in cities, because we were just experimenting with cash and vouchers. But I do believe in the very same way that the urban food companies globally have a role to play in what is accessible to low-income people and just what is accessible in the marketplace. And this is a conversation we have to drive publicly. And the thing that's so fascinating to me about it, making the improvements affects every band of the socioeconomic pyramid, but it benefits most significantly the lowest income, who are hostage and don't have means as a way out of.
Thank you so much. Let me come back to the room. We have CKM colleagues with mics, so if you'd raise your hand. Corinne, I see Rob Voss there. And will you please introduce yourself so Nancy knows who you are?
Thank you. Well, you already introduced me as Rob Voss from IFPRI. You said at the end, the companies have all the power. And you seem to be suggesting, well, the way to change things is through partnerships and moral persuasion. But being at the International Food Policy Research Institute, what role do you see for policies?
Well, first of all, I told Schengen and Rajul I wanted to provoke you. Of course, companies don't have all the power, but they do have power. And I think the role of IFPRI is critical because it's really a three-legged stool. Government is extraordinarily important. The federal nutrition programs in this country and the United Nations programs that are affecting the global food supply are so very important. I'm assuming I don't have to make that case to this crowd, right? Civic society is important, is very important. But the reason I emphasize that in this room is because I think that is the area that is underappreciated. And I think there is lots of work for IFPRI to do in exploring and thinking about. There's no shortage of research. I can come up with a good 10 or 20 ideas I'd like to have your help with as we face this. But part of it is perhaps IFPRI could help us reshape the issue, because sometimes we're looking at a narrower subset of the problem than we appreciate. You know what I mean? Because when we look at the emergency work in and of itself, without looking at the emergency work as a complement in the developed world to the subsistence farming that we do a better job of. But in this country, it's not just IFPRI, but Feeding America, so many others, fail to look at the entire picture. How do the government federal nutrition programs come together with what is available in the urban food supply and the emergency work being done to come up with a whole picture? And it's forming our children globally. And with 415 million diabetics in the cities, we need to start looking at the whole picture and asking, how is it that we're getting there?
Nancy, thank you so much. Colleagues, Stacy, Corinne.
Thank you, Nancy, for a fascinating presentation. I especially enjoyed hearing about the two great examples you mentioned of PepsiCo and Dannon, and I just wondered, first of all, is your PHA, are they going to have a role in sort of assessing the progress of those institutions and also in the impacts? And then secondly, I think these two companies, you know, they're leading the way, hopefully, for other companies to follow. But will other companies follow, given the pressures the stockholders place on them to have, to have a profit when they're making so much profit on sugar and salt? Yeah.
Well, these are great questions. Boy, I could give a whole nother 20-minute talk on this if you'd let me. But well, just to say first, yes, absolutely. We are, I think one of the reasons PHA is most valued is we are a third-party verifier, and we work with outside auditors to verify all of these commitments. And that's one of the many reasons companies come to us, because they want to be held accountable for doing the work, the ones who are going to go first and lead, and they want to get some credit for it. Second, I just mentioned two examples, but there are not dozens but hundreds of others of these partnerships that we're negotiating, and they're incrementally moving the ball. It's not a light switch that we're flipping overnight. We are incrementally improving the food supply. But to your very important question about the stockholders, I think about this so much. I think this is one of the problems, really one of the real problems driving so many social problems in the country, is that we've gone too far towards rewarding, profit and dividends. And I think that's going to shift, because it's so funny. We use the word shareholders as though they're like another species. Shareholders are people. I bet you 2/3 of this room are shareholders, if not all. If you're invested in a 401k, you're a shareholder. We are the shareholders. We have to do a better job holding our companies accountable for the things that we want. If we want our companies to value a healthy food supply, to value physical activity, we have to hold them accountable to do that and be willing to sacrifice our personal dividends to a certain extent. I am willing to do that. Now, there is, as you probably know, there are some companies and mutual funds that are beginning to do this very explicitly. But I think when the public gets really serious enough, and I don't want to say too much about this because I'm 7 days into my new job, and I don't really know where the bathrooms are. But what I know I need to explore is the role of the consumer in all this. Because I think if we engage the consumer more effectively in our work, getting the companies to move, it will begin part of the ball rolling that you're raising very wisely, that as shareholders, not them, we need to demand different outcomes from our companies.
Thank you very much. I come back to the room. Channing, do you want to go ahead? And then I'll come to you, Derek, next.
So I'm wondering, you have sources of funding, and some of them, I'm looking at your report, come from companies. And how do you balance this? You're trying to get them to change, but you're also dependent on them for funding. This is something that I think we're going to face in future.
Well, that's been true everywhere. Whether I've been at the World Food Program or the Capital Area Food Bank or here, it's the same question. We're pretty careful that we don't have a pay-to-play model. So our companies fund us primarily through our summit and through our gala, and the primary part of our work funding comes from foundations. And one of my jobs and one of the reasons I was hired was to really work towards public funding, and I think that that's pretty important. But like anyone who ever takes money from a company, whether it's the Brookings Institute or IFPRI or the Food Bank or the World Food Program, you have to establish your internal rules that allow that money to flow in ways that allow you to hold yourselves accountable. And I can tell you that we do that. I've only been on the job 7 days, and we've already turned away a chunk of corporate money that I would love to have had, but because you do have to draw lines. But I think we have to quit using those challenges as an excuse not to engage. I mean, we live in capitalist countries. These are capitalist societies. The companies play outsized roles. And I think, in a way, we've made a mistake in not holding companies more accountable. I think they want to be held accountable. But I think we get this church and state mentality to and trust me, I don't know how you feel at IFPRI, but I do know how it was at the World Food Program and many other places where I've been, where there's such an allergy to engaging with companies that it walls off real opportunity. And it's not easy always to find ways around that, but I think we need to do it and to have open and frank conversations.
Thank you, Nancy. You did ask to provoke us.
Yes.
And in turn, we are provoking you. So I think that's a good dialogue. Corinne, we had Derek over there.
Thanks. Yeah, interesting talk. Derek Heddy here in the Institute. So I was quite struck by the fact that you're doing some sort of nutritional knowledge interventions, which have been done quite a bit here at IFPRI. And I was actually also in conversation with the Gates Foundation, who's launching a private sector engagement strategy for nutrition in the next few months as well. And one of the things we were talking about was what's been sort of some of the major innovations in the food sector in the past couple of decades, because many of the innovations, processed foods and so on, they emerged 40, 50 years ago. And one of the things that certainly struck me, quite a lot of people now are getting healthy food delivered to their home. And it does come with recipes, and you could call that a nutritional knowledge sort of intervention. Is that a sort of intervention that you might have thought about in the context of your work?
Such a great question about grocery delivery and innovation. Well, there are many, many, many innovations in the food space, and we're going to be featuring those at our summit May 2nd through 4th. So mark your calendars, please. May 2nd through 4th, walking distance from here at the Renaissance Hotel, we will host a riveting conversation on innovations in the food space and pull together many of these companies and others for discussions. But there has not been that much innovation in the retail grocery sector until very recently, right? And delivery that you've mentioned has sort of blown the doors off. Yes, I've thought so much about it. In fact, I got to know PHA through that I work at the Capital Area Food Bank. We worked very closely with Fresh Direct, a retail grocer that's just come to Washington. You may have seen their signs all over the metro. And they're a grocery delivery company. And through the partnership with Healthier America, we agreed to pilot a project where we'll be delivering subsidized groceries and it's very complicated, and I don't want to go into all the details because to accept pay for groceries, we have to get some waivers from the federal government. But yes, I'm extraordinarily interested in delivery and how that could shake things up, because one of the problems I didn't address so much in the talk, but is very important, is just lack of access to fresh food in the low-income areas, and retail's one way to break through that. Another way to break through that is convenience stores. You know, at the Partnership for Healthier America, we plan to work with convenience stores to bring some healthy foods so people can get to those foods. But delivery is riveting. You've got Amazon Fresh, you've got Fresh Direct, you've got these meal kits, and right now Blue Apron and some of these other things are far, far, far too expensive. But we'd like to innovate with some of the entrepreneurs at PHA to get some meal kits at a really affordable price point that we can get into some low-income areas.
Thank you very much. Purnima, am I having eye contact with you? I am. Okay. Melissa, would you bring the mic to Purnima midway through here? And for some reason or the other, keep coming down, Melissa. Purnima is right there. For whatever reason, this quadrant of the room is very question-oriented, and the other three quadrants are very silent. I think you need to really restore the quadrancy of your quadrant. Okay, these three quadrants come next. Purnima?
Great. Thank you for a really interesting talk. My name is Purnima Menon. I'm a researcher with IFPRI and actually based in our India office. We're looking a lot at data there now on issues of non-communicable diseases and things like that, along with the problems of undernutrition we look at. In looking at industry involvement or relationships with public health, I'm really struck by what seems to be a real failure around, well, a mix of successes, but lingering challenges around tobacco, which is a very serious public health issue, where it seems like countries in the West got things together, but then the tobacco industry just kept moving to other countries where regulations were not as strict and where markets were opening up. So I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit on how we can accelerate some of the learning that needs to happen in the food space so that we don't have as much of a similar situation. You're already seeing that, as consumers in the West are less oriented to sugar and sugary drinks and all of that, the companies are moving products and similar lines of production out to other places. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. We don't want to solve it here and then push it all over the rest of the world, and that's why I think your first question was an important one as linked to this. One of the interesting things is many of the companies we're partnering with are global food companies. So PepsiCo is not saying, we'll quit marketing, we'll lower the calorie content and the sugar content in our US markets and we'll jack them up in other markets or keep them high. They're doing it globally and across the company. So I think one piece of the answer is to work with global companies for global change. And I'll just tell you, as an aside, that when I addressed that very point when I was talking to the board of PHA about this new job. And I said one day it might be Partnership for a Healthier World, because companies are global and there's no reason to begin just in America. PHA was an outgrowth of the former First Lady's work in physical activity, movement, and nutrition. And so it began in the United States of America, but I certainly don't think the work is limited to the United States of America. And as shareholders hold companies accountable, I think we should hold them accountable to make the improvements and change globally, wherever they are, whatever markets they're in.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Finally, a hand at the very back. I think it was Ricky. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ricky Robertson, and I know basically nothing about this sector. My simple question was, you talked about doing negotiations and making deals with companies, and so I was wondering what exactly is being negotiated and what is the deal? I mean, what do they get out of it, and what are the carrots and the sticks? And just help me understand.
It's a great question. Well, as you know, every deal is different. And I assume your question you're asking not about the deals at the World Food Program or the Capillary Food Bank, but here at PHA. And at PHA, I think there are two important value propositions. One, well, let me just give some context, because I want you to know the space that I'm coming from, which is not the space that everyone's coming from. Some people feel like companies are the evil, bad players, and they want to do all this bad stuff, and they're trying to trick you. So they want to get your coverage or, whatever. I'm not in that camp. I've been working with corporations throughout my entire 30-year career, and I have found corporations to be like other organizations. They're full of some people that are great and you love and well-intentioned, and some, who are out for themselves or whatever else. But companies, in the end, they want to please their consumers, and they want to contribute to a better world. Now, they want to make money doing it. So that's the thing they're up against. So that's my framework for answering your question. So what does a deal look like? Well, I believe that the companies see which way the wind is blowing. So you have to divide these deals into categories. Let's take the food-specific deals, like with Dannon. Companies understand that the public wants to eat better. They understand that governments in developed countries are beginning increasingly to hold them accountable and to pay attention to some of the health outcomes that I'm talking about. They understand. That's why I attended a global conference where they were challenging, how do we make money and meet our moral imperative to help people eat better? They understand this. And what they need is to get there in a way that doesn't completely blow up their business model. So they need to get there in steps and not overnight. So the way negotiations traditionally look, and again, I'm new, but I've been exposed to a lot of stories about them, is you start off with what the company wants to do, which is sometimes not to move as far, and then what the Partnership for Healthier America would like to see as an ultimate outcome, and it begins a conversation where you're going back and forth and ending up in the middle. I wasn't there, but it may well have been that the partnership wanted Dannon to eliminate sugars in 90% of its product or 100% of its product. We settled out at 78% of its product. So the negotiation is always PHA pushing the company to go as far as they can, and the company staying within the boundaries of what they think they can do and still make a profit. What do they get out of it? Well, for one thing, they get out of it two things. One, to Stacy's question about do we verify? Yes, they get third-party verification. Because if a company does all this bloody work, even if they know the consumer wants it, but nobody acknowledges and verifies that they've done the work, they may not get the credit for it. And the other thing, and I don't mind saying it all, we do try to give the companies who are doing this incremental, brutally difficult change credit for it, which I think they strongly deserve. I mean, it's hard to move the ball. It's hard to improve the food supply. And when they improve it, they deserve credit. And we work pretty hard to try to give them some of that credit. So it's a balancing act, giving them credit while still holding accountable and keeping the bar high. And
Thank you, Nancy. Let me take one final question, and I give that to Shengen Karim.
Thank you, Nancy. About a year ago, during one of our senior management team's meeting, Paul Duresh and I were proposing a new policy change to incentivize our researchers to produce more policy briefs. Very short brief, anybody can read. So we introduced that policy, and I thought probably the impact will be very small. Paul said, "You will see. We will see more publications of the briefs." So we have some disagreement, and Paul said, "That's bad. $100. You know what happened? I always win, right? So I won. but he didn't give me the cash. After 1 year, he gave me a certificate that I always donated that money to Capital Area Food Bank under your name. Well, I was very inspired by that. So now my question to you is a serious question. How can you mobilize individual donations? I mean, this is the big cause for everybody, right? I also learned a lesson. So I will ask my wife not to donate all this junk food to the food banks, maybe give cash. That's something I learned from you. So how can we really make sure that individuals like us can just have incentive to increase their donation?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, one, I will say, the Capital Area Food Bank is doing really some of the most important urban hunger relief innovation really in this country. And of course, you can always go to their website and donate. And I'm a donor to the food bank, and I will remain a donor to the food bank for my life. And we also accept individual donations at the Partnership for Healthier America. And there, I also think part of what we need is for the community to engage in the conversation and to help really raise awareness about the changes we need to make in urban America to really make it a healthier place for everybody. I encourage you to go to both of those websites, and either organization, either one if you support them, it's really important to give cash. I mean, food is great, but the food the food bank most often needs are fresh vegetables, which they need to purchase because you can't go taking your leftover eggplant. And it's just like the cash and vouchers globally. Cash is so often better than food that gets shipped and siphoned off.
Nancy, thank you. Before I formally close this part, if there's any final message you want to leave for IFPRI researchers, IFPRI colleague on the research front, this is the moment.
Well, I just want to say I am actually going to be thinking of some very specific ideas that I send over to you. But I hope that just the conversation has made you want to consider the role of corporate as you think about urban hunger relief globally, to really think about the role that the global companies are playing in shaping the food ecosystem and really how that's shaping the health of our globe's children. It's so critically important. And then ask yourselves, no matter what you're researching, just bring that piece into it because, sometimes the thing you don't see is just missing from the puzzle until you see it. So I would just encourage you to really remember that perspective as you do your work. And then I promise you to send over some very specific suggestions.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, please join me in thanking Nancy.